I'd like to open the City of Littleton City Council virtual city or study session for Tuesday, August 25, 2020. It is 6:31 or 18:31. All council is here, and we have, I believe, most of our planning commission with us tonight. And what we are going to do, we're going to start off with study session item 1A, ID number 20-216, study session with City Council and Planning Commission to review Phase 2 amendments to Title 10 of the City Code relative to downtown development. And just for everybody on the meeting, Planning Commission, the way we do our meetings, we raise our hand. There's a raise your hand icon. So when you're ready to ask a question, if you could please select that icon, and I'll take you in the order as we go through this. Just a reminder to all City Council members and Planning Commissioners, if you will, please speak clearly into your microphone. Lean forward so that we can hear you. We will be stopping tonight during the presentation 7 times to take questions relative to the subject we had just heard. So if you will, when you get to your questions, and it's going to be questions only, not comments, we're going to just take the questions. So if we have 10 members wanting to have questions, we're going to have to limit it to 3 minutes each. And that alone would be about 30 minutes each time we stop. We're going to stop 7 times. So that'll be well over 3 hours added to the minutes. And also, I would hopefully, if we could have the city manager, if you, in your replies, if you could keep them rather succinct also, so that we can keep moving through, so we can get all of our questions in. At the end of the presentation at the end of the full presentation is when we'll take some comments. And if the staff doesn't provide a response tonight, I'm going to ask that the city manager, if you will please keep track of those comments and even read them back to us to make sure that the planning commissioners and city council members have their comments on the record and for you to address at some point. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our city manager.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council, Planning Commission. Welcome. I mentioned here just a few minutes ago before we got started that staff had sent out to City Council and the Planning Commission an email here that had attached kind of an expanded agenda here. And I've asked Kathleen Osher, our Community Services Director, to spend some time here before we get started, just to kind of walk us through exactly what are we looking at here this evening and kind of the process that got us here and how we're going to be moving forward. So if you're okay as well, Mayor, at the end of Kathleen's comments, I just want to kind of wrap that up with a couple of additional thoughts here on our process. So with no further delay, I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen Osher.
Good evening, City Council and members of Planning Commission. There's been a lot of work to get to this point, and tonight is our chance to provide you with an informational briefing on the amended Title 10, which represents the Phase 2 of making changes relative to development in downtown. Tonight's presentation is intended.
Kathleen, I'm sorry to interrupt. I left off. This is for a briefing only to give us a briefing of what's going on. You're not looking for any direction from City Council or Planning Commission at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. So tonight we again are not seeking any direction from City Council or Planning Commission. It is intended to be an informational briefing. And just as a few reminders, again, this is Phase 2. We do currently have a moratorium in place through October 11th. So this process has been underway first with a Phase 1 set of amendments to the existing city code. And then if you'll remember, during council's retreat, they expressed interest in addressing some additional issues. Staff suggested that those issues all required more public input and more discussion for City Council, Planning Commission, and Historical Preservation Board. So we did pursue a change to the scope for our consultant, Candid Keast Collaborative, as an interim step to provide a bridge until we have the full Unified Land Use Code, which is anticipated to release June 7th of 2021. So while this is Phase 2, we do continue or we do expect continued conversation throughout the entire Unified Land Use Code. But this evening represents a second phase of amendments to Title 10, which we think help capture the urgency that council expressed in the retreat. You'll remember those issues that the council raised. I do want to make a reminder this evening, we have been working through this process each time in a study session format. We have not been able to capture consensus in the form of a vote. So what is before you tonight in terms of the briefing is what we heard is the sort of middle ground of input across all of the appointed bodies at the elected body of city council. So that is Planning Commission and Historical Preservation Board, City Council, and then also what we heard in terms of public input throughout the process. This evening is your chance to ask questions for clarity, and we'll review the schedule of next steps. Last night was the first step in moving forward the consideration of this amended Title 10. Historical Preservation Board unanimously accepted the Title 10 that is amended as is in front of you tonight with 3 conditions. And I'm happy to share those conditions. They did ask for an additional definition in terms of the definitions in the amended Title 10 to include a definition of sustainability. They asked that the Columbine Mill be included in the view corridor, key view corridors. And then they also asked for greater clarity on how step backs would be implemented as part of the plan. They felt the definition was solid, but they wanted to better understand how that implementation would work. I'll have this evening both Brett Keast from Candid Keast Collaborative and Brian Mabry, who have been working on this. I'm also joined this evening by our Director of Community Development, Jennifer Henninger. We hope to answer any of those questions for clarity, and we'll kind of let Brett guide us through this presentation. Again, we have pauses set in there to be able to answer those clarifying questions, but we'll go through that process this evening with Brett and then hope to answer all of those questions. If there are additional questions, as was mentioned before, we look forward to another opportunity to both discuss those with Planning Commission and City Council as they take their next steps. And then also if there are other forms of and ways that we can help answer those questions, we are here and ready and willing and able to get on top of those and make sure that you get the answers that you need to make the decisions that are in front of you. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brett Keast, and we'll get started with the presentation. I'm going to ask Brett to, at each of the moments when we have those pauses for clarifying questions, to stop sharing his screen so that we're able to see all members of City Council and Planning Commission. So.
Kathleen, I'm sorry, let me just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right, Mark, you asked for that. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to kind of expand a little bit on Kathleen's comments here. So as the council and the Planning Commission ask these clarifying questions, we are looking for specifically some key issues that for which the council would like to consider in the study session that would happen before the October public hearing. And at that study session, then the council could deliberate, talk in more detail about those key issues, and then even talk about possible amendments. It would be then, if so directed by the council at that study session, staff could then draft these amendments, do some analysis around that, and bring that forward to the ultimate public hearing that's scheduled in October. In that way that the council then could be poised to act here in some comprehensive approach. So that is the intent. We do have Sama Fox, the assistant to the city manager. She is ready here to take notes, as you suggested, Mayor. So as we go through the discussion this evening, then Sama is going to keep track of these key issues, and then we can summarize that at the end of this discussion, if that's acceptable, Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, Brett, we're ready and for the presentation. Looks like you're unmuted now. Perfect.
Yes. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Very good. Well, good evening. Pleased to be back with you. I'd just like to reiterate the comment that Kathleen made, as there has been several sleepless nights and a lot of work that has gone into this to this point. We know it's not over the hump yet. So we look forward to seeing what questions you may have this evening. And as we move forward, having an opportunity to, take whatever direction you provide us and to make the necessary changes to bring to you a phase 2 amendment document that reflects the consensus of these two groups. And of course, we already received it from the HPB. So again, want to reiterate from Kathleen that from all the input we received, as you can imagine, we've started to receive some consensus on a few points. There's still some outstanding points that we would expect there to be further discussion in later meetings, as well as ultimately coming down to a vote. We're happy to work with you to tell you positives and negatives or our experience from other places of how some of these things have worked. But at the end of the day, council will give us specific guidance as to how you want it, the final draft written. And so we will be pleased to do that. So also, as you can appreciate, this is an iterative process. So there are the topics that council kind of listed off initially that were the highest priorities. I guess those probably came through your retreat, as well as some of the early projects as we were working on this phase 2. But there are some items that deserve full attention that we just simply couldn't give with everything we've had on our plate to this point. Those will be coming forward as we take next steps into the ULUC. So please don't think that they are being left out or ignored or pushed off. It's just simply capacity and trying to address all the highest priorities that council has laid out for us as we've brought this amendment version forward. So all of this is rooted in the comprehensive plan document. And y'all know better than I how much time and conversation and decisions and back and forth went into getting that document to the point of adoption. So that document is good in that it provides the overall policy direction. As you know, it doesn't get into the weeds and nearly in terms of what we're talking about at this juncture. It is, we like to use the example of the menu. You have a lot of options. You've chosen some of those options, but we have not yet added any of the ingredients onto any of those options. That's what we're in the process of doing. So the plan has laid out the foundation for us, and we are now building on that plan document as we are putting the ingredients in the cookbook, if you will. It gets to the very specific details. There's often questions about why all the detail. And I will tell you, and I think I've said this before, probably the two most important words as we're going through this process are predictability and certainty. And you simply can't get to those two words if there is not enough detail, if there's not enough words on the page, not enough description, if it's not articulate enough for people to understand what the council's expectation is and what you, representatives of the community, want to see in this document. So it is detailed by its very nature. And so we try to simplify it as much as we can with graphics and through explanations and things of that nature. But the detail, I think many of you appreciate, is necessary so that when somebody encounters this document, they can read through it and they know what they need to come forward with in order to have a high degree of certainty that their project can go forward. So kind of the overview of the phase two. We'll be talking about some of the priorities that were laid out for us. I think there's probably been some others that have emerged through this process. We have tried to address those as much as we possibly can, but many of those may spill over into the ULUC. We will outline for you what is reflected in this latest amendment that is before you now for your review and consideration, and that of both commission and council. We'll kind of identify the roles of the public in identifying some of the preferences. We've gone over a lot of that before. We'll summarize the approach to kind of the best practices drafting, and then there will be some considerations that will emerge either through our presentation or through your questions that will be things that need to go on the checklist of things that you'll want to consider as you are processing this and moving it towards consideration for adoption. So we had the meeting last night. We have this meeting this evening. Next week, we'll be back with you, commissioners, to have your public hearing. So this is a good informational session to prep you for that. And then September 15th and October 6th are the two council readings. And many of you know the moratorium is on October 11th. So we have taken a lot of material and tried to condense it and address the full range of issues to help address this moratorium. So I hope you appreciate the volume of consideration that's gone into what we have before us this evening. So phase two amendments, focus on downtown. We picked up where staff left off with the phase one amendments. These, again, can't emphasize enough, we really look to the comp plan vision and the policies to help set the course. We are putting meat on the bone in terms of what character means. It takes some time to get your arms around that, but hopefully at this juncture, people are starting to really have an appreciation for the difference between the amendment that you have before you and what your current zoning ordinance is. And then obviously working up to that October 11th date. So there were, if we can boil the priorities down from those that we initially heard, it's those that are listed at the bottom of the screen. And we have gone back and forth and had many conversations and discussions in work session formats and with staff meetings and hearing from public and polls and all sorts of things that we could to try to get as much input as reasonably possible under the conditions. So I won't bother to go through all those at this point, but I think you are familiar with those. There's also been a number of other issues that have come forward as we've gone into this process. These represent the values of the community, particularly as it relates to downtown, the greenscape. In part, why their conversation of sustainability came in last night. We said sustainability is not a term per se. The HPB asked that we define that term, but our point to them was there are sustainable provisions that are interwoven throughout this entire amendment and will be interwoven throughout the entire ULUC going forward. Roof slope, as we've got into different building types and design and their influence on the aesthetic and scale, that has been a topic of discussion and has been included in the amendment. Slot homes, we've landed on that as prohibiting them within the downtown area. So slot homes is not within this draft and therefore it is not defined because that word does not show up in this amendment. View corridors has been addressed. One of the amendments requested conditions last night was addressing this. Protection of historic assets. That is kind of the ground floor of much of this. But I will tell you that historic preservation, as you all know, is a big topic and a very, very important topic. And that deserves its own focus. And so we will be tackling that in a bigger way. as we move forward into the ULUC. So please don't think that that has been short-armed to this point, because it will be brought back in as we get a little bit farther. Affordable housing, again, will be a thread throughout this entire process, but that is part of the reason why we're talking about all the different things that we are here in terms of different building types, housing types, et cetera. And then, of course, sustainability. So this process is naturally iterative. So we start with drafts and we hear comments and we redraft and we repeat that process over and over and over until we get to what we have tonight. And that will continue going forward. So if we encounter things in the ULUC that has a dramatic reconsideration, we can always revisit this phase 2 amendment to make sure that those are adequately addressed, so we can tighten all those up and have a whole at the end of this. So a big point to make here is that much of the work here is repurposing and renaming your central area district. That district right now has brought you a long way. It perhaps has not delivered everything that the whole community would have preferred. It served its purpose, but it came to the recognition that we need something that is more articulate, more specific. There's a lot of broadness, there's a lot of vagueness. It's predicated upon use, which doesn't get us to the point that we're at with this amendment. In a lot of cases, it's very open-ended and discretionary. While I can see some argument for having that discretion, it usually ends up in decisions that are not always consistent because they're based upon a project by project basis over time and different leadership and so forth. And then trying to get to that predictability and certainty. So that's the importance of being very articulate, of trying to spell out in black and white what do we want downtown to be and what's required to get us there. Now, there's been public engagement, and I will say across the board, and having done this 200 times in cities across this country, that you could always have more public engagement. Everything that we feel could be done, particularly since the pandemic happened a week before our first Envision Studio, I give a ton of credit to your staff who pulled out all the stops to not let that affect them in terms of their outreach. They have done a great job. And there has been, the website has always been up there. There's been reviewer guides drafted. There has been social media outreach with Facebooks and tweets and posts on Nextdoor and on LinkedIn, email blasts, boards and commission meetings. So all these things have gone together to bring us to this point. I feel like, compared to other places that I've worked, that y'all have double dotted the I's and double dotted the T's, but admittedly, there's always going to be folks that, maybe would have liked to have more input in this process. They're welcome to this process. The intent is not to deny anybody the opportunity to be involved in this. So you can see on the screen, I think most of you are aware of all the things that have been going on dating back to February. Many of them have involved you. We have, I feel like, given the pandemic and given the switch over to Zoom, that we have probably achieved as much as we could have expected. Obviously, we're getting much better at Zoom now, as you all have experienced. So going forward, we can utilize that experience to continue to try to strengthen and improve upon the ability to achieve additional income or input. I don't have the document in front of me, Kathleen, that tells me of the stopping points. So would you please interrupt me when I get to those?
Yes.
Or somebody
Yeah, and I'll chime in. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we've ordered these slides in the same order as we had in terms of the priority issues and some of the issues that have emerged. In this document, you will see tables that will identify different building types and the different character areas, the 4 different character areas within the downtown district, the DT district. And we simplified this from what you had seen before into a single buffer yard. And that buffer yard is 5 foot wide. Again, keep in mind, this is in a downtown context. It's 5 foot wide and requires 4 evergreen trees per each 100 feet. So generally 25 foot on center. That again spells out. So that is part of the sensitive edge treatment of having a way to buffer between properties. We also have taken the advice of, recognizing the degree to which existing vegetation and green contributes to the character. And so there are tree canopy coverage requirements for each of the 4 character areas, as you see in the table at the bottom. These numbers, these percentages, were calibrated based upon the lot size, the building coverage, if there is on-site parking or any other type of hardscape improvements, that there is only a certain, there's a certain amount of pervious area that's left. And within that pervious area, how much mature tree coverage could we expect to get? So those were not just pulled out of the air. There was some work done to try to figure out, what could we get that is not going to overcrowd these properties and put in too many trees that will affect the health of those trees. There are also a series of different improvement types. And in a downtown, you can appreciate that it's much different than in a neighborhood area or elsewhere where we're looking for, broad expanses of green space. In a downtown area, of course, that would be nice, but you might see that in the form of a plaza or a pocket park, perhaps a common green, outdoor seating areas and other things like that that create public space that is privately maintained in many of these instances. So there's a whole menu board, if you will, of different open space types. And then there are standards and guidelines for the development of each of those. So that is addressing the open space, green space, and then of course, tree protection. If there are trees on site that can be preserved, that's the #1 priority. And so trying to make sure that development is able to occur while protecting existing vegetation to the maximum extent practicable.
And Brett, I'm going to have you stay on that slide and then stop sharing so that we can take any questions for clarification.
Okay.
All right, we'll open it up to council and commissioners. Who would like to go first? All right, we have Council Member Milliman. You have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. Thanks. I would like to say thank you so much to city staff and to Kenny Keats for all of the work that you've done with this over the last months and years. Really, really appreciate all of your hard work. I do have a question about the tree canopy coverage and the percentages that were calculated in the 4 different character areas. How did you come to calculate those percentages, and how does that compare to other main streets or downtown that are comparable to Littleton?
Thank you for that question. So as dating back to when we first started this, it is understanding the lay of the land in Littleton, the lot structure, the lot areas, the lot size, a lot of the things that the CA district brought to bear. You've got a lot of lots that have a lot of impervious cover. Going forward, you'll have more pervious cover for things that build or rebuild or perhaps adaptive reuse. So we looked at what the requirements are in terms of the different building types and the building coverage that's required to support those. Parking is a consideration as to meeting the parking requirements, whether that is in full on-site or partly on-site, and thinking about pedestrian sidewalks and other types of improvements. And then from that, you can identify the amount of pervious area on each lot. And then generally spacing out trees in a healthy condition. And we utilized, I don't recall exactly the resource that basically identifies the mature tree canopy of trees that are native to the Front Range and to Littleton in specific. And so we went through that exercise to try to figure out, how many trees can we fit on each of these sites, given the different building types that are permitted on each of those, the building coverages, and all the other requirements, and arrived upon the percentages that you saw on that last table, stretching anywhere from 10% on Main Street to as high as 25% on downtown neighborhood.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. If we can, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mayor. And I certainly also am grateful to the staff and the consultants for the work they've put in up to now. I wanted to ask, in past presentations from KKC, we had seen proposed code items that were explicitly designed to protect and enhance our local and downtown environment. And this included, for example, swales, rain gardens, etc. And I had hoped to see some of that in this latest draft, and wanted to ask what happened to some of those things. And for Sama, who's taken notes, I do want to put sustainability on the list for council's follow-up study session.
Yeah, if we could, let's keep that comment if you can, Sama, and let's stick to our questions. Did you get his question, Brett?
I did get that. I made note of that. Would you like me to respond to it, or?
Please.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, Scott. I think this is an important topic that we'll be addressing not only here, but throughout the whole ULUC. I appreciate that being kept on a priority basis. We are big advocates of thinking about stormwater collection management, ways to convey stormwater and do it in a way that provides for green infrastructure. Ultimately, if that's something that the council gives us direction that you want to see incorporated into this, we will revisit that and make necessary revisions to incorporate that. We'll have to do a little bit more background work with engineering and so forth. Obviously, depends on soil types and a lot of other things, but we recognize that as being a priority. So,
great. Thank you, Brett. And just a reminder for Sama, I'm going to, at the end of all this, I'm going to ask you, as everybody goes through their comments, I'm going to ask that you may give those back to us to make sure that everybody's comments were captured correctly. We'll go to Council Member Elrod, if you will, please.
Thank you. If you could give me an understanding of, given these new percentages versus what we experience right now and are seeing now in our downtown area, would you say it will be about the same, more, or less?
Well, The intent is certainly not to reduce what we have now. The intent is to improve of what we have. I think what the difference that we have is right now we have some public parks and some areas where we have a lot of green. When we start talking about a lot of the individual lots and their development, we're going to apply all of these standards. So you will get more canopy and more green. The thing I did mention was we have a 75% live plant material requirement. So you will see more green than what you're seeing on development sites today.
Great. Thank you. If we could have Commissioner Schwartzbacher.
Yes, my question is this is about green space. And it talks about in here that all the areas that this is other than impervious surfaced areas, functional areas. But yet amongst our green spaces, we're allowing terraces, decks, porches, roofs, balconies, and pools. It seems to be a contradiction of what we're saying our general standards are.
Yeah, thank you for that. So in the downtown area, it's trying to find a balance between, providing for development and maintaining character and maintaining a certain amount of green space. It is common in many downtowns that there are quote unquote hardscape types of improvements that are allowed as part of that public space. So not everything is necessarily a green park, but it could be green treatments in other ways. It could be by way of planters. So there's a number of different ways that those can be treated. If there are any of those that you are uncomfortable with, you can certainly strike those, or we can address those any way you want to. There are some places that even will count balconies towards a public space because it gets eyes on the street. So there's a number of different ways to carve this up. So that is what you see in the amendment today, but that can certainly be changed if it's the council's wish.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Stallman.
Hey there. Real quick, Brett, I didn't hear you mention it, so I'm just going to ask to make sure I'm clear on it. But the percentages, the canopy percentages, are we assuming that those are canopy percentages for mature trees? Obviously, we're not going to be planting, 60-foot trees right from the get-go on some of these lots. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, it is the mature canopy, and there are minimum standards at planting depending upon whether it is a shrub or whether the type of tree, whether it's an evergreen or what have you, as to the canopy or as to the caliper, as well as planting standards to make sure that they are planted in a way that gives them the chance of survival. And if they die, they'll be replaced.
Right.
So yes, that is at maturity. And here again, that emphasizes the point of tree protection because we want to keep the canopy that we have today as opposed to replacing it with 3-inch caliper trees.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That was the last of the questions, and good job, everybody, keeping everything under 3 minutes. If we can move on to the next subject, which I'm thinking a few people are excited about. I guess it's going to be about heights, building heights.
And Mayor, I just wanted to remind everyone we're using that raise your hand function as part of Zoom for when you have questions. So if you have questions, please do use that function. Yeah. Mayors can easily identify you.
So far, everybody's doing that.
Yeah, mine is not working for some reason. It's not allowing me to do that.
Oh, well, Commissioner Bazat, did you have a question on the last section?
I did. On table 10-218, the downtown district character area, I think we need to put the abbreviation in there so it's not confusing. And I'm meaning the zoning designation. My question was minimum tree canopy coverage. Is that based on net or gross? I think we need a definition on that. And also, I think from previous discussion we had, we wanted to include also a minimum landscape coverage also in the same table. Thank you.
Okay. I'm trying to scratch that down here while I'm.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And just to remind everybody that the hand raise is if you go to, at least on mine, is if you go down to the participant at the bottom, then it'll take you over to the raise your hand icon. All right, if we can move on.
Okay, can you see my screen once again?
Yes.
Okay. Building heights. So you all have seen, you know, the tables and the building heights. This has been a topic of interest all the way around, as we fully expect it to. The approach since the very beginning was to try to balance the scales of hearing from all the different groups that are involved in this process, factoring in, you know, the analysis that the city hired to have done in terms of economic viability. That's not the overall driving factor, but that is just one of the many considerations that has gone into this Phase 2 amendment. So for each of the different character areas, there are permitted building types. And for each of the permitted building types, there are a number of metrics or a number of standards that are required. Those include the number of stories and the feet, the overall total footage. I understand there is no question as to how many feet are we considering for each floor and things of that nature. We're happy to talk through that, to work through that. But the bottom line is in the table that you're seeing now, where it says height, number of stories, and feet. What that means is if a development proposal comes in, they cannot exceed, for instance, 4 stories or 55 feet. So just because it's 55 feet doesn't mean they can cram in 5 stories. So 4 stories is the max and 55 feet is the max. So depending upon building type, obviously those are constructed differently. A mixed-use building, for instance, might have a 12 to 15-foot first story and then lesser stories going on up. But different building types have different requirements. So we're not trying to outguess the market or outguess what might be built, but we're simply saying, you know, it's, as I said, whatever's on that line B right now, 4 and 55, 3 and 45, 5 and 65. It is also important to point out that we have the provision still in there. If I can get back to that file. Got too many screens open. I apologize. Hang on here a moment. So you'll see there is the asterisk here under the downtown mixed use. And you can start to see the beginning of the note here at the bottom. It says a maximum of 5 stories is permitted in the downtown mixed use character area that lies between Church Avenue and Alamo Avenue, but not abutting Alamo, and north of Berry Avenue, except in the white hashed area of the character map, which we'll look at here in a bit, where the maximum height is 3 stories or 45 feet. Once again, we have not yet taken a vote on this. I know there are varying opinions. The Historic Preservation Board, we had some conversation on it. At the end of the day, they recommended adoption unanimously without making any changes to height. So we've heard it's honestly, it's been about right down the middle, 50-50 from the folks we've talked to as to, those that want to keep building heights shorter and those that think in certain areas and under certain conditions, including the sensitive edge and transition standards that are built into this, such as, maximum 2-story height if you are abutting a historic district or historic building, the buffer yard requirements and other things of that nature. So I have not taken away from this that there is an acceptance that, a certain number of stories carte blanche is acceptable. But what I've heard is that there is tolerance or acceptance for up to 5-story buildings predicated upon the conditions that are spelled out in here as to where they may happen and the other types of standards that help to ameliorate or mitigate the impacts. The other thing that we have going here is the step back. We've talked about this before. So you might have 2 stories and then a 3rd story would have to be stepped back so that when you're on the street, you will look up and see the 2 stories, but unless you're standing a distance away, you're not going to see the 3rd story. So most of people's experience is driving on a street, parking on that street, walking up and down sidewalks and into restaurants. And so by not having a 3-story wall or 4-story wall that really starts to cramp you in, they've designed that step back. The question that came from the HPB last night, they weren't questioning. They just wanted to make sure that it's clear enough so that it can be clearly implemented without a lot of questions. So I think we probably have some additional work there to make sure that it's written in a way that is clear. So we'll work with staff to make sure that it's clear to them and so they can administer it. Let me see here. So also important in this is building placement. I think you can all appreciate that downtown, when you think about building placement on a lot, is very eclectic. That's because you have worked from an ordinance that has used minimum standards, meaning those minimum standards can be exceeded. So you might have some buildings that are set way back, some buildings brought to the street, some might have parking in front, some might have it on the street or to the side or to the rear. And so it's very hard to get a definitive character when you're operating off of minimum standards. What has been put into this is a build to zone where you spell out both the minimum and the maximum. So it's a lot more deliberate than what you're used to in making sure that buildings of different types and different character areas are built more consistently as to its proximity to both the front lot line, side lot lines, and rear lot lines. So in all cases, again, we have all the graphics that are letters that correspond to the tables. So hopefully they're pretty easy to follow and to understand. I guess we're still going, right, Kathleen?
That's right. We're going to stop for clarifying questions after this slide.
Okay. And then building, massing, and again, step backs. When you think of places wherever you've been that have a quaint and a very desirable, what you deem highly livable, attractive, high quality place, that didn't happen, by the goodness of someone's heart. It happened by having very explicit standards and processes. And the things that you're finding here that basically are rooted in the comp plan and rooted in the downtown design guidelines, but expressed in terms of definitive standards rather than a guideline. So all these things put together are what are going to create the character that we have heard from all of you that you want. Building massing and step back is a critical ingredient to this. So in addition to the height, in addition to where the building is placed on the lot, we need to think of its overall scale in terms of how much the building covers that lot, how we provide for that pervious land area, and then how, again, you reduce the perceived or the apparent bulk and scale of a building by having step backs of upper floors. And you've got some good examples of that along Main Street and throughout downtown today. And again, want to emphasize that there are sensitive edge details that apply where we have defined what a sensitive edge is. So for instance, where a downtown mixed use Main Street or downtown transition area abut the downtown neighborhood character area, or abut a downtown historic boundary or an individually designated local landmark, then there are a set of additional rules that apply. Again, trying to be sensitive and contextual with what already exists, and of course, historic structures taking precedent in terms of their importance of sustaining their quality and integrity. So I believe this is where we're hesitating, correct?
Yes, we're going to take questions on these last 3 slides. Again, if you'll use that raise your hand feature, I think you can also use Alt and the letter Y to be able to raise your hand if you're having trouble finding either that button or if it's not functioning for you.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Chair Rednicki.
Yeah, clarification. You talk about floor to floor heights, especially in the in every district, in the residential areas up to multiplex and townhomes. Floor to floor is for upper stories 8-foot floor to floor. Take away the floor structure and you have a 7-foot ceiling. To clarify, shouldn't that be floor to ceiling heights? The other way, the way you're doing it now is, quite frankly, preposterous. It should be floor to ceiling, not floor to floor.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and get a response to that.
Yeah, let me dive into that a little bit more in greater detail and look at that and make sure that it is calibrated the way it needs to be. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So I will flag and highlight that to tackle.
Okay, just the second comment was the.
Let's save our comments. We're going to save those to the end, if we could.
Will do.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Councilman Grove.
Where is the white hatch area of the DMU on the character map?
The what?
The white hatched area. It's on on slide 8 at the very bottom.
Yeah, is Jennifer on with us? Jennifer,
yes,
Jennifer, can you the slide of the scale, the map of the scale that we have it in the PowerPoint presentation does not show it as well as it needs to. Can you describe that as well as you did last night, please?
So the hatched area, and actually you had a slide in your presentation this evening that shows it a little bit more clearly. I think it's probably 3 slides back that shows the DNR. The primary hatched area is south of Crestline and west of Prince. And then there's a portion of that DMU hatched area that is also adjacent to Santa Fe. And the road, I believe it is Curtis. So, but Brett, if you can bring up the, I think it's like 3 slides back. Or Kathleen's doing it. There you go. So this is where you can see the hatched area better. Pam, is that a little bit clearer?
So,
Oh, if you get way down in there, it
right.
says white hatched.
Needs to be clear.
Agreed.
Yeah, I didn't see it in the document either. If we could clarify that somewhere along the line and make it very clear.
Excellent. All right, thank you. We can go to Commissioner Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple questions, try to form them in questions. I noticed in the residential building types, rear setbacks, it appears that there's a minimum dimension and then a minimum dimension with an alley. I'm just curious why it doesn't appear there's I'm not sure what that dimension is for. It appears there should be 2 of them, or should there be 2 of those dimensions there in that in the table? That's my question.
Okay, again, I will dig that up. Generally, the topic there is whether or not you have garage access off of an alley.
Correct.
And if so, making sure that there's adequate room to maneuver in and out of the garage and things of that nature.
Fair enough. And then I just want to piggyback onto Commissioner Rudnicki's comment. I think he said something about the upper floor. I'd also like to look at the ground floor to floor dimension that says 9 feet maximum for residential uses, and I believe it's 14 for commercial uses. I just would like to understand some more about that. That seems low. Let's see, and I believe that's it.
Yeah, some of these things will go back to Nori, since he was the original drafter of them, and make sure that we understand the methodology before we just go and change it. But we will make sure that we get back to you with answers.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Fay, I know you had your hand up. Did you still want that up?
No, I was going to ask to see the slide that shows the.
Okay.
And apparently that's not available tonight. But we do need to, because a lot of the material refers to it.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Allman.
My comments were the same as regarding the floor to floor, but do you mind if we flip back to that slide, because it's the F on the table regarding building heights? I just want to make sure that I think it referred to just the 4th floor. And so I was having the same question basically, but at the 4th floor, the height limitation was 9 feet. And is it saying that's going to apply to other floors or just that floor? And we've already questioned though whether that's the right number, but I'm just asking, is that just for the 4th floor? Can we go back to that or no?
Yeah, that's the same slide you just had up, Kathleen.
Yeah.
So you have a maximum number of stories within 10 foot of the edge, which is 2 stories. The ground floor, floor to floor height, which is the 14, what I mentioned earlier. And then upper floor. So to me, that would mean anything not including the ground floor. And that is for a mixed use building type. So,
Brett, can you share the slide that shows that chart? The slide that's sharing right now, I believe, is the map.
Okay.
I think we're all 3 of us are asking basically the same question, but it would be helpful if we could just quickly look at that table.
I believe this is the table that we're looking at here.
There we
Okay.
go.
And so on F, it says upper floor to floor is 9 feet, whereas ground floor to floor, 14 feet. So I guess to clarify, we're just going to look at all those numbers as a whole, correct?
Yeah, and this is for the mixed use building type, which first floor would be commercial, upper floors would be residential. So that's the difference between the 14-foot and the 9-foot. But we will look into whether those dimensions should be greater, lesser, what have you.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner
Okay, thank
Reynolds.
So, unmuting myself and continuing on the questions about the ceiling heights and floor heights, it appears that there's a difference between a mixed-use building type and an apartment building type. And if your apartment happens to be above a retail shop in a mixed-use building, you get a 9-foot ceiling. But if you're in a pure apartment building, you only get an 8-foot ceiling on those upper floors. And just hoping that can sort of explain the thought process that went into that, or maybe we set that in the parking lot and it's just generally look at all the ceiling and floor heights.
Did you get that question, Brett?
I certainly did. Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, who was the last speaker? I didn't pick
That
up.
was Jason.
Okay.
Jason Reynolds. Did you have a comment, response, or do you want to move on?
Well, I think it's again, let me go back and talk to Nori and see where that came from and just bring forward all the comments that I've heard tonight and make any necessary changes and come back to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Commissioner Schwartzbacher.
So I had two questions. The first one was the parking structure had no maximum height. Was that on purpose or?
Sorry, making your comment. Well, comment so noted, and I would, I guess it depends on the parking structure, if that's a freestanding parking structure, or if it is constructed in combination with some other type of project. But I would expect that too would need to be clear as to a maximum height, that it could not, exceed other heights. We certainly wouldn't want that to upset the apple cart in terms of the other building types and their requirements.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that,
sorry,
I had one other
go ahead.
question, if that's okay. The other one was in the previous draft, when we had the upper story, which in that case was 4, but now, of course, in this case is 5. A lot of those taller buildings were limited to location like the apartment buildings are right now, but they are not in this draft, like the mixed use and the office institutional don't have that limitation of, being south of Alamo or north of Berry. And I was curious why that change.
Honestly, I don't recall. Kathleen or Jennifer, if you could help me out. Brian has been delayed, so he would be able to answer you on the spot. I apologize for his tardiness here.
If you can make note of that and get back to us then on that, Brett.
Repeat that one more time so I make sure and get it down clearly.
That was Commissioner Robin Schwartzbacher's question. If you could please make note of that and get back to all
Yeah, I
of
was
us.
asking if Robin could summarize it real quick.
Yes. So if you look at the apartment building for the 5th floor, it limits the location of where it can be. So it's basically south of Alamo, though nothing to do with Alamo, and then north of Berry. And in the previous draft, the upper floor limit, which was 4, had that requirement for almost any place where the 4 stories were. In this present version, it does not. So like we have mixed use and office institutional where there are 5 stories or perhaps 4 stories in the commercial, it does not limit the location as it did in the previous draft.
Okay. So if I'm looking at this correctly, there is an asterisk next to 5-story buildings. And then there is a note at the bottom of that table that spells out the maximum is 5 stories permitted in the DMU character area that lies between Church and Alamo, but not abutting Alamo. Do you see that?
I see that in the apartment one, but I don't see it in the other ones.
Okay, so that's your question is, okay. So the apartments are, okay, so basically anywhere there's 5-story, these have that same note.
That was my question. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mayor. The answer to this question may be obvious, but I want to make certain, and particularly with regard to the 5-story and 65-foot maximum in the DMU use area. Is there any scenario with how the maximum height and maximum number of stories are expressed here that we would end up with an additional half story?
Well, I believe,
for example, if you put an apartment on top of a mixed use development and it has a sloped roof form, would you end up with 5.5 stories?
we have a definition for story. We have a definition for half story. We're defining the number of stories and we're defining the number of heights or the number of feet in the height. So you raise a good point, and then we need to close that gap if there were someone to interpret that. We know that's not the intent. So let us look at the language and make sure that we sew that up.
Okay. Good. Thanks. All right. Thank you. Councilmember Elrod.
Thank you. Both in the table 10-4-18 and 10-4-18, so both of those tables where it's building height and building placement. When I look at the downtown transition area, my expectation would have been that that is similar to the area it is trying to transition from and or protect. So I think of transition as same form, but different uses or expanded uses. But in building height and in building placement, there is a difference. For example, in downtown transitional area, it would allow a height of 4, while it is abutting the downtown Main Street, which is only a height of 3. And the same with the lot, the lot coverage. That downtown transitional area allows for a greater lot coverage than a downtown neighborhood. So again, my expectation and understanding of transitional is that it essentially is the same form, but allows for greater uses. You recommended the form itself does change. So can you share why that is?
If I'm understanding you correctly, Karina, you're saying that you would expect the DTA to be kind of a step down toward the...
Or step same. It's more of the same of the abutting area it is intended to transition from. And it seems like it is stepping up or being bigger.
Okay. If I'm understanding it correctly, I don't think that is the intent. Part of the answer might be the sensitive edge, but it sounds like what your question is basically the DTA might be allowing for more bulk form than the DMU?
Yes.
Okay.
No, than the DMS or DNR.
Great. Do you need to get back to us on that, Brett?
Yes, I will. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Good question. Chair Radnicki.
need some clarification on your definition of the second or the story and a half. If you look at the definition in the definition section, the definition reads basically it's an attic space. Every municipality I've dealt with, whoops, I kind of lost everybody here. Can you still hear me?
I still hear you.
Okay. In every municipality I deal in, the half story is approximately 60 to 75% of the floor plan, floor space below. It's not defined as attic space. A half story is defined as a partial finished space of the story below. So I think that needs to be looked at.
Will do. Okay. Yes, I noted that, and we will look into that and get back with you. And if there's any changes warranted, we'll let you know.
It looks like we just have one last question from Commissioner Miller.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Commissioner Miller.
No worries. Hey, maybe a clarification for Councilwoman Elrod. I noticed that the DTA and DMU headings in the table switched from the draft, switched position, but a lot of the data below it did not. So I've counted like 32 different times where DMU and DTA data has been switched. So just as a heads up, and that may be what Councilwoman.
Yeah, we will absolutely go back to that. I appreciate you drawing that out in the right up until the last second, actually beyond the last second, all the changes were being made, and there were some pretty significant or substantial changes. And so apparently those did not all get swapped over. So we will take
pass this time. All good.
All right, cool. All right, thank you. Let's get one more council question in there from Councilmember Elrod.
Thank you for that, Dan. The question still holds, though, Brett, just to make sure that my understanding of the purpose and intent of DTA being similar to the budding areas. My question, though, is maximum lot size. Where do we articulate the maximum lot size and how that differs by the different areas? The purpose of my question is obviously lot coverage on a larger lot size has a very different impact than a lot coverage on a smaller lot size.
You have that, Brett?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
You want to respond or get back to us?
Yeah, let me get back to you and dig a little bit deeper here.
Okay, and I just want to ask Commissioner Mrazahi, did you figure out that raise the hand icon? I'm hoping he did. Okay.
I did, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen, let's go ahead and move on.
All right, Brad, if you can share your screen again. And we're going to cover the open space slide, and then we'll stop again for any questions of clarity.
Back to where we left off here. Okay, so we're just covering this one slide?
That's correct.
Okay. The buffers that you see in downtown will be much different than what you will see elsewhere in the ULUC for obvious reasons, constraints, which Karina was just starting to get at. So there is an illustration that you see there, as I described earlier. We simplified it. We originally had type 1, 2, and 3. We boiled that back down to a single type. We made it 5 foot wide, and we require 4 evergreen or ornamental trees per each 100 foot or portion thereof. In my subsequent review of that, I would like to further clarify that, because the purpose of this is to provide a year-round screen. And obviously evergreens serve that purpose, but ornamentals may not unless they are non-deciduous. So I believe that there's some additional language there to make sure that that is clear. A fence or wall is optional. And let me see what else. The evergreens have to be a minimum of 10 foot from streets. And it emphasizes that the open space is privately owned and maintained, even if it is open to the public. So generally, buffers are spelled out as to where they apply between where some of these character areas come together, or in some cases, perhaps building types. And so we simplified it to a single standard. I think we'll probably return to more standards when we move forward, but that's where this amendment stands at this point.
All right. All right. Do we have any? Are we ready for questions?
Yes, we are.
All right. Well, we'll go to Commissioner Coriano.
Yes, appreciate the idea of the buffers and the graphics that accompany it, but and also the concern that sort of an evergreen screen would be helpful to buffer between properties. But anybody who has a spruce tree or even an Austrian pine in their yard knows that 5 feet is really not enough for those things to grow out, and it's going to be growing into the house and into the neighbor's property. So I think you just have to give a little bit more thought in terms of, what types of plants are required and or encouraged in those buffer areas.
Agreed.
All right, thank you. Again, do we have any clarifying questions? We have Council Member Elrod.
I agree with Craig's comment, and the other, what I want to ensure is that we don't create too many dark or closed spaces that may.
Okay, is this a question or a comment?
It's so are these buffers creating dark spaces or areas that may be unsafe or perceived to be unsafe? Have you considered that in some of these requirements?
Honestly, I don't know that has been factored just yet. Sometimes we do apply trying to think of the word, standards that police use to make sure that sites are developed safely. So that we will use that as another screening criteria as we're going through this to make sure that there's some language in there to that effect. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you. Any other questions, clarifying questions? Seeing none, let's move on.
Okay.
All right. Are we ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Parking. This can be one of the more perplexing. I think many of you can agree. Just for context, the approach that many cities take and what you find in many zoning ordinances is that they simply exempt parking in downtown. That solves one side of the equation, but not the other. So we don't think that is the approach to take here. As you all know, that development and the different building types and their uses and scales have different parking demands. And so if you look at the cumulative parking that is required based upon the parking ratios, there's a lot of parking. Understand that parking we refer to as a land hog, right? In other parts of town, parking consumes more of the lot area than does the building. That is what we call an auto-urban character. That is not what is in downtown, although you have some of that in downtown. So in order to achieve the character that we're all after for downtown, we need to think differently as to parking. Surface parking is the enemy of downtown character. So what you have at play here are some options and alternatives to how we can address parking and try to create incentives or reasons why those who bring forth development proposals would choose the better option for parking in lieu of surface parking. At the end of the day, most communities, as there has been conversation there, will come to the realization that the city will have some role in identifying either some type of public parking system in downtown, whether that is a series of surface parking lots on rear elevations and wayfinding and pathways and lighting and things like that, whether that is in terms of a parking structure. At the scale that we're doing in downtown, other than perhaps some of the 5 stories, most of these are not going to occur at a scale that you would expect a developer to bring in a parking structure as part of that. There's simply not enough square footage to warrant that. So we have tried to tap into what we know about travel patterns and the changes in travel patterns and parking. Point blank, parking in downtown is different than parking at a Walmart. So we all inherently recognize that, but yet most people still expect to park in front of the front door and walk in. So what we have tried to do is to find that balance. And it's a hard balance to get to. So the approach that has been taken, and is what is in front of you right now, is to spell out the different use types that are permitted in downtown. Recognize there's about 30 more uses that are now permitted than what were in your earlier zoning ordinance. So this has done nothing to reduce the types of uses that can happen because we're focused more on design and form. So for each of those different uses, there are spelled out ratios. Elsewhere in town, those ratios will be much different than what they are in downtown. We simply don't have the room, short of having a major parking garage, that we can stuff all these cars into. So there is, for multifamily, there is 1 space for a 1-bedroom and 2 spaces for 2 or more bedrooms. This is not uncommon. In fact, I'm working on codes right now that have gone to 0.75 spaces for a 1-bedroom. So they, are dealing with many of the same issues that you are. There was some redundancy in the code, so we removed the mixed use requirement for office. Restaurants, we're referring to the traffic engineers, Institute of Traffic Engineers manual for restaurants. Beyond that, there are a series of parking credits and reductions. In the earlier draft, there was no cap on those. In this draft, there is a cap of up to 50%. no more than that. So nobody is able to cumulatively use these different mechanisms to come up with no parking. So they're going to have to provide no less than 1/2 of the required parking. But in order to do so, they're going to have to think about how do we transport people. Rideshare, as we know, is more than likely here to stay. So we have edited on-street parking for time of or day restrictions for on-street spaces, and we've spelled out basically drop-off space for rideshare, and given a credit that a rideshare space equals 2 off-street spaces. The idea being a lot of people will jump and share a Uber where single people or fewer people might come in a single occupant vehicle to park. So rideshare is factored into this. Also factored into this is, let me see here, shuttle. If they're providing for a shuttle, so if there's an office building or another type of thing that is providing for a shuttle to RTD station or something like that, that would enable them to qualify for a reduction or a credit, if you will. Tuck under parking, you've got some good examples of that downtown, obviously tucked under and not generally out of sight. So there is an incentive in here saying that 2 tuck under spaces is the equivalent of 3 off-street spaces or on-site off-street spaces. So trying to utilize every avenue available to us to utilize what we heard from your consultants as to parking is one of the big determinants of whether or not projects will even happen. Thinking that certain projects that are on the fringe are more likely not to happen than to happen if it cannot pencil out. So we're using that as a consideration. We're utilizing all the tools and techniques that we've used in other codes in similar places across the country. You have the RTD station. That, incidentally, the radius around that station has been increased to 1/4 mile. I believe it was 700 feet before, and that's measured along any sidewalk or other walkway from the front door to the nearest parking space of RTD. So trying to provide all the encouragement and incentive for making maximum use of alternative transportation in lieu of everybody driving their car. At the end of the day, I believe that you're going to reach a synergy in downtown, that the conversation as to some type of public or public-private parking program, parking structure, or other approach is going to come to the fore because we know that parking is deemed an issue in downtown. But it goes back to the old quote that says, nobody comes here anymore, it's too crowded. So when you think about downtowns, crowding is good to have. That means it's a sought after place and people are coming there and they're going to come there and they're going to find a parking place because they want to go to dinner, they want to be in that environment. So that is the approach that has been taken for parking. We remove the pocket island provision, remove landscape timbers as barriers, and we have xeriscaping in here. We got a comment recently about referring to it as low maintenance or low water or something like that. That's fine. It's semantics to us. But the point being that we're dealing with, native drought tolerant plant types, not wet, thirsty plant types that require irrigation. I think that would be it. I'm sure there's a stopping point there, Kathleen, after parking.
That's correct. So now would be time for clarifying questions.
All righty, we have Council Member Fay. You are muted, Carol.
Once again, Brett, how do you align your comment that acknowledging that people want to park in front of where they want to go with the assumption, almost an assumption in the document, that there will be a parking garage that won't be in front of where people want to park? How do those two things fit together?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say that there will be a parking structure. I think my opinion is that that will become a heightened conversation as time goes by. So your question as to people parking in front, I believe that people, when there is a market or a destination, as downtown Littleton is, there's not a one of us that don't agree that it is a special place, and there's not many places like it. So in the metro area, if somebody is looking for that type of place, they're going to go there, and they're probably not going to be put off by having to park a block and a half away. So wayfinding is going to be important, that there's wayfinding signs. So when somebody comes that's not familiar with the area, it shows them where the parking areas are. Ultimately, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any sort of master parking study done for downtown. At some point,
I think I might have two questions. I'll start with the first one based on Mark's comment. One of the incentives from a parking reduction, facilitating park sharing, meaning we have parking lots that are empty during the day, but then full at night, or vice versa. So it seems like we have parking lots for certain uses that are only in use for certain times. So how do we encourage, or how have you considered encouraging more of that shared parking space as opposed to just forcing each use to have their minimum?
so I think the first thing that needs to be done is to look at that 300 foot that we talked about earlier and increase it. So in a downtown area, you've got a variety of different uses. Each of those uses have different peak parking periods, right? So restaurants are different from office buildings, are different from residents, are different from institutional uses, et cetera. So the shared parking provisions that are in there basically look at maximizing the use of those spaces during the times of day when they are needed. So there is a table in there, and you basically calculate how many uses for different time periods and different use types and things like that. The whole point of that is exactly that. If you have vacant parking lots that are underutilized, need to be better utilized to meet the parking demand, that is where somebody can go to them and, foreseeably lease some of those spaces and utilize them at different times a day. If it's a public lot, then obviously that'd be something that's brokered by whoever the public body is. But many of those I would imagine are privately owned lots. So it could be a way for them to receive some revenue used to improve those lots and help meet the overall parking demand of downtown.
Is there anything that we're putting in the code to encourage that? I want to make sure we're specifying that a leased lot qualifies for your parking requirements, even if it's 100 feet away or 200 feet away. I believe we have something like that now.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to bring in a building and they are required to have X parking places, they're going to be going in search of where they're going to put those parking spaces. So in that manner, they're going to utilize everything that's available to them in the code for, shared parking or on-street parking adjacent to their property, or if they're close to, shuttle program or whatever that's going to be. So purely by having that within the code makes that available to them. Nothing's coming to mind as a way to further incentivize that, unless you start playing with the numbers or something. But
all right, thank you. Is that it, Karina?
Second question.
That was your second question. We have other questions coming up. Do you have one more short one?
I just wanted to know if you considered the new way we're experiencing downtown, which is closing our streets and putting dining outside, whether it's on our streets or in our parking lots. Have you had the opportunity to take that into account as you considered parking?
I have not, no. But during one of those events would be a good time to do some of your parking studies to see where that's pushing those spaces and what the vehicles coming and going and turnover rates and things like that are. So normally they will do that on a typical weekday and a typical weekend, but they would probably need to consider that on a typical night when you are, doing outside dining and closing down streets. So they really understand the impact of that and can design the parking program around that. But no, we haven't specifically looked at that.
All right, thank you. Council Member Grove, and then let's try to get to another slide.
Currently, if somebody joins the district, they get a 50% parking reduction. Is that included? Is that eliminated? Is that accounted for anywhere in this updated code?
Good question.
If I understood you right, Pam, it's not outright. I mean, they have to earn that credit, right?
By joining the district, yes. It's an incentive to join the district.
I guess that I don't know.
And Brett, we'll address that with the HP code, which would be part of the Unified Land Use Code, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Great. Thank you. That's it for those questions. If we could move on to the next.
And Brett, we had put a pause in after the land use table changes, again, pausing at the definition changes, but it may make sense to tackle both of those slides and then take any clarifying questions. So that's a slight change to the detailed agenda that you had. So our next questions will be related to land use table changes and definition changes. So Brett, if you can cover both of those.
Great, thank you.
Will do. Okay. So the land use table, as we indicated, we tried to keep intact to the maximum extent practicable. And the reason why we're able to do that is because in this phase 2, the emphasis has shifted. Whereas your ordinance before is decades old, the philosophy and the approach to it is decades old, and it was all predicated upon use. Now we are more focused on building form and design and all these other things that we've talked about. So with exceptions of, drive-throughs and things like that we're not dealing with here, the particular use that goes on inside of a building is of less emphasis than it has always been. So you can accommodate more types of uses. We don't care what type of office it is. It functions. It's similar. It's functionally similar to an office. So the use matrix has consolidated uses into use categories and defined each of those. So in the online code, when you come across a land use, you'll be able to hover over it and it will define it. In some cases, that might say including but not limited to X, Y, and Z land uses. So the ones that kind of rose to the top here as being changes since the last time you saw this, vehicle service minor. So that was put as a question of, should that use and or definition remain? And if yes, it might be considered as a conditional use, not a by right use in the mixed use Main Street and transition areas. So I know you're not answering that right now, but something for you to ponder. Group home for elderly, permitted with limitations. So rather than being a conditional use that requires a public hearing, understanding how a group home for elderly use operates and spelling out the limitations in writing. And if they are able to demonstrate how they comply with those, that can be administratively approved, rather than defaulting everything to a public hearing and a conditional use. So for those uses that we have a pretty good handle on and can write limitations for, that's been done. So we're not just punting everything to a conditional use, which slows process, burdens staff, burdens commission, burdens council, and applicants certainly. There's a new use for recovery residents that is permitted in the 3 character areas that you show there and is defined. And then parking structure is permitted with limitations rather than being a conditional use, with the note of the earlier comment as to making sure that we clarify and address height. So those are some of the land use table changes since you last saw this. In terms of the definitions, any of the uses that changed, the corresponding definitions changed along with them. So that is a pretty significant change over your current ordinance, in that every use category is defined. So that helps for those oddball uses that somebody walks in off the street and wants. Of course, it's not going to be in your regulation, but you're going to look for those, or staff's going to look for those with the criteria that's spelled out that are functionally similar to uses that are in the code. So having definitions will be very helpful. Their definitions for family and slot homes were removed. Obviously, slot homes has been decided to be prohibited. And the complying with townhome apartment building types will preclude slot homes from being built. There have been clarifications or additions to several of the architectural or urban design terms that there's been conversation about, that we need to be more explicit about what those mean, those listed there. There have been some graphics that have been added to terms such as the build to zone and clarification of terms. So we will need to further clarify the half story as we talked about earlier this evening. Additions and corrections to some standards or use related definitions, such as detached tree canopy, indoor entertainment, kennel, offsite parking. So this is kind of a work in progress. If there is a term that you would expect to be in the ultimate ULUC, but it's not yet in there, it's because that term is not in this amendment, but may very well come forward as this process unfolds. So I feel like the definitions have been pretty significantly vetted to date. So we're feeling pretty confident and comfortable in them. Not to say that there might not be some additional requests for clarification.
So Brett, I'm going to have you go back a slide, and then we're going to take any clarifying questions relative to the land use table and definition changes. So next, okay, perfect.
All right, we are ready for Mayor Pro Tem. Go ahead.
Thanks. So Brett, the way our law generally works is that if something's not explicitly prohibited, then it's allowed. And I wonder if it may be a better idea to explicitly prohibit slot homes for that reason.
Yeah, we've done that where we've actually added uses and just shown them as being prohibited in all character areas. So, you know, that could be done.
Great. Thank you. Well, we'll go to Chair Rudnicki.
Your use table, this came up at the Historic Preservation Board meeting last night. Use table prohibits apartments in the main street. I think staff tried to clarify it. I couldn't find where it is. Apartments are allowed on the second or third floor. Neither could Rick Cronenberger find it. Is it in there somewhere where apartments are allowed? They're allowed. No, they're there now and they're a dandy use.
Yeah, the apartments are allowed on upper floors in mixed-use buildings. Apartments are not allowed as a freestanding single-use property.
Because they'd fall under mixed use. Okay.
Yeah, fall under mixed use.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Grove.
You may have sort of answered this. So what is the rationale for removing slot homes? I mean, from the very beginning, we didn't want slot homes. And now all of a sudden there's no definition, there's no prohibition for them. And I wanted to understand why.
You know, I'm probably not the best one to answer that because I wasn't in on all those detailed conversations. Jennifer, can you help me out on that one?
Sorry, I had to get off mute. So on the slot home, why we have no reference to it now? Is that what you're asking, Pam?
Yes.
Yes.
So like Brett was saying before, we certainly can add it and have it prohibited in all character areas, or we can also add a definition for slot homes in the definitions and then turn around and prohibit them.
That would be great. And maybe that's one of the parking lot things that we put on our list. Thank you.
All right, cool. Are there any other questions? I see none. Let's go to the next slide.
And Brett, I'm going to have you present both the zoning district and character area, and then we'll take a pause for any clarifying questions.
Okay. Okay. The zoning district and character area changes. We have basically renamed and repurposed, if you will, the central area district and replaced it by the downtown district. As I said, many of the uses have carried through, albeit with better and more articulate design standards. The character areas that have been developed are within the DT district. They're not districts in and of themselves, but there are areas to further delineate the differentiation and character throughout the downtown area. The downtown mixed use allows for additional intensity. And again, based on what we talked about tonight, we'll kind of go back and look at those places where maybe they weren't swapped out, where the DTU and DMU were flip-flopped. And I believe the question that Karina may have had in terms of how that interacts with DTU and the standards between them, which one is more intense. The idea being that the downtown transition area buffers and protects DMS, the Main Street, and the neighborhood residential area. So here again, we'll look at those standards and make sure that they're coming along with that point. Downtown Historic District encompasses Main and Alamo Streets. Historic preservation regulations will be updated. And then there is some things that are going to be coming forward on that. I know I saw a character statement, I guess, of Main and Alamo Streets that has had a lot of time that has been put into it. So that will be precedent that will be used in crafting everything going forward. And then draft regulations to protect historic assets and character. Once again, historic preservation is a topic in and of itself. We have alluded to it. We have created, standards to protect it. We've incorporated it into, purpose and intent statements and things like that. So there's work that's going on, a movement afoot that I think many of you are already aware of. And so all of that is going to dovetail back into this. And as I said before, if there is anything that warrants us revisiting this amendment, even after it's adopted, we'll certainly bring that to your attention to make sure that everything is in sync with one another. Oops. We already saw parts of this. I think we already addressed parts of this. And staff can probably weigh in. Jennifer, be prepared. So the map that you see now, where you have the DMS for Main Street, the transition area basically protects that Main Street area from the downtown mixed use areas, and particularly the areas where more intensity could potentially happen. The 3-story limit to the area northwest of Geneva Village and south of City Hall across Berry has been removed. The DMU has been extended north a half block between Rapp and Nevada. And the DTA has been extended east and west along Alamo. So that honestly looks much different than it did originally when this first came to you, to the input that y'all have provided us and that we've heard throughout this process. And then the Main Street district has been extended east and west along Main Street. So that is the map as proposed and presented, or as I should say, as in this amendment that you will be addressing for adoption.
Right.
And I believe that is the
Clarifying
last
questions. I know that is our last chance for clarifying questions.
All right. Does anyone have any clarifying questions at this point? We'll start with Mayor Pro Tem.
Sorry, this question's a little miscellaneous, but I didn't know when else to ask it. Chapter 5 of our existing code is landscaping. And obviously that's closely related to my interest in sustainability. Is that going to be addressed at some point in the ULUC process and revisited? And I wonder if council will have an opportunity to weigh in on it.
Yes, absolutely. The greenscape and those portions of landscape that relate only to downtown is all that has been addressed so far. But there will be more substantive landscaping standards in the ULUC that will sync up with what's in here. So basically those standards that will apply citywide across the board will be in its own section on landscaping. And then those provisions that relate specifically to a building block are addressed in that building block, for instance, downtown.
Thanks, Brett.
All right. Council Member Elrod.
I have a question regarding the extension of the DMU north of Little's Creek, what was previously DTA. And then I had a question that I've asked several times, which was the designation of DMU for the Geneva Village area. So I have not gotten an answer on the Geneva Village yet. And I'd like to understand the change in DMU on the between RAP and Nevada.
I would like to ask for staff to weigh in on that if you would be so kind.
So in regards to the DMU of Geneva Village, that Karina, that's what you're asking, why it's DMU?
Correct.
As opposed to?
Institutional or government.
So currently Geneva Village is zoned CA. It is not public or institutional. It is not a city use. Yes, the city owns that, but currently it is zoned CA, so we're not changing the zoning on Geneva Village. So are you asking why we chose DMU as opposed to another character area?
Yeah. Yes.
She said yes.
So you're thinking more like should be DTA as opposed to DMU?
It could be DTA, it could be even DNR for that matter when I look at the surrounding area that it's abutting. And given that we're really not looking or focused on use here, we're changing our mindset of how we're defining this. We really are looking at form. And when we look at form of its current state, it is much more of a residential form than it is a multi-story commercial.
So we can definitely put that as a discussion point for the study session.
Okay, good. Yeah, that sounds a little more complex. All right, thank you. Council Member Grove.
There was no explanation.
I'm sorry, did you have another one?
The second question was the change in DMU between RAP and Nevada.
Brett, can you pull the map up again?
Yes, I can.
Karina, could you repeat your question?
Yes, there was a change, an extension of the DMU between RAP and Nevada that goes north of, I think, Littles Creek. So that is a change from the previous. Previously, it was DTA all the way down to Littles Creek.
I was thinking that was the other way around. I would have to look at a previous version of the map that we extended DTA down to the alley. I think before DMU was all the way up to Alamo. So that's another one that we can take a look at.
And it sounds like more broadly, it is revisiting those boundaries and digging in on the character area maps. So the staff of community development worked really closely with Brett's colleague, Brian Mabry. So we can bring that rationale and discussion to the study session. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Is that good, Karina? Good. All right. All right. We'll move to Councilmember Grove.
Why did you remove the 3-story limit in the area northwest of Geneva Village and south of City Hall across from Berry?
Again, I wasn't included in a lot of those conversations. I was with Brian and others, so.
That's another one. We absolutely can. It goes to what Kathleen just said. We can take a closer look at the character map.
And you know, those are, I think, particularly with the character map, what I think we would suggest is that let's look at those boundaries, have that discussion, and any changes to that map then would be 100% appropriate as amending what you're looking at today. So we can kind of walk you through the rationale and the staff conversations with Brett's colleague, and then, you know, turn it over to what you think is going to be most appropriate for each of those character areas and what those boundaries look like. I think Planning Commission on Monday may explore some changes to that. So We'll also incorporate any feedback that we get on the character area map from Planning Commission's public hearing on Monday as well. So we'll bring that evolution forward to the study session, as well as the rationale that kind of as the map has evolved.
Pam, can you say the area again?
It's the area northwest of Geneva Village and southwest of City Hall across from Berry. They removed the 3-story limit.
Right, it specifically calls it out in there. Yeah.
And it's not really clear exactly what that boundary is, so maybe that could be clarified too as part of your presentation. Thank you, Kathleen.
Right, and on that last map that we have, that the cross-hatching is difficult to see. But Pam, are you referring to the area where the Essex House is right now? Is that?
I'm looking at the slide 18, the slide we just went over.
The first bullet.
The first bullet. Yes, that first bullet on that slide.
Yes. Okay. So north of Crestline. A rationale for that is right now, I believe that is zone B1, which would allow, it's based on an FAR, so could allow for a very tall building. So
let's add that to our discussion.
Yeah.
If we could add that to our discussion, because I know heights is a major concern for many of the members.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Is that it, Pam?
Yes.
Commissioner Mazzari, you did have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a general comment that I wanted to bring up. It seems that maybe it's my confusion, but a lot of the annotation on tables, D, E, F, A, B, C, they are not clearly marked on the drawings or on figures. So it's confusing sometimes, like there's 2 E's, one of them is vertical distance, one is horizontal distances. So I think it's good practice to, number one, like tables, you have table number. I think figures should have figure number and exactly refer to correct figure. So when you're talking about distances and so forth, we know which one you're talking about. Also, there is no mention of loft or mezzanine level within the first floor in a, like a downtown area. Is that allowed or not? So I want a clarification on that. And as I said, those tables are, maybe it helps if you're talking about distance to say horizontal, H in front of it. If they are vertical, say vertical. And be sure that all of them are annotated correctly and correspond to figures, because those are the meat of the whole document. I think you guys have done a great job. This is a very cumbersome practice, so I appreciate that. I just wanted to make that comment because as a person that worked with this, sometimes is confusing. And I think you need to look at those numbers one more time. For example, in one of the tables, it said maximum 4th floor plate area, 80%. And above that, it say maximum number of floors is 3. So it doesn't make sense to me that there's a 4th floor percentage when there's no 4th floor. So maybe I misunderstand something, but I think these tables need to be much more clearer to common people. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Razan. Thank you. All right, so we're at the comment section here, and Mayor Pro Tem Scott, I know you had a comment you wanted to make early on. Are you ready to make that now?
I think I've made all the comments I have for now, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Chairwoman Nikki, I know you too had a comment you wanted to make earlier.
Yeah, gather my thoughts here. On the heights, we have basically 2 existing districts in our downtown area, the R5, which has got a 30-foot height limit, and the CA, which has a 40-foot height limit. We are introducing in some areas a 65-foot height limit. Littleton is known for moderation, quite frankly. Maybe the younger people would disagree, but but I think we need a little moderation here in our building heights. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Milliman.
Brett, can we add this to the study session? I don't know, I can't remember how long ago it was. Maybe it's just like a month or two or so ago. We had that, you presented the economic viability report. And I'm interested, as we're talking about different heights, limiting heights, adding heights, whatever, in the downtown area, what is the economic viability and vitality for, say, a building that's 3 heights versus 4 heights? 4 stories, excuse me. I'm so tired. I've been working in a COVID shed all day. I can't talk very well. The differences between 3 stories and 4 stories and how that relates to the economic vitality and the viability of our downtown businesses and our downtown going forward 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I think that we might be losing sight of that. And I feel like we still need to think about the future and not so much the past. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Grove.
Are you ready for additional topics for study session or?
Yeah, we're on comments so that we want to make sure they're captured.
Okay, so in addition to the varied things that we talked about for height and parking exceptions, I'd like to add approval for exceptions for those things like land use and green space that have a big impact. I think it should go to a quasi-judicial board and have a public hearing rather than just staff. Another thing I would like to add is roof slopes, especially in DTA. There's not much there. I'd like to address combining lots. It may have done with wall length, but we didn't really talk about that tonight. We need to make sure that that is prohibited and clarified. I think we mentioned slot homes. We wanted to get rid of that. Open space, one of the things we did not address under that I think we need to look at is the requirements that a terrace, a balcony, a deck, a porch, or a roof garden could suffice for open space. I don't think that's the way it was intended, and I think we need to address that. Partial view, this may be a point of clarification, but I think a partial view is not specified and open to interpretation. And another area on the zoning we have not even addressed at all. Around page 160, there's a variety of prohibitions against what we call tourist homes, rooming houses in residential areas. And I would advocate either we enforce those under STRs or we get rid of them if we're not going to enforce them. So I would like to add those things to our study session list.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Stallman.
Kathleen, the Title 10 document that was part of the agenda for tonight on Granicus, I had a chance to read through that. I've got some feedback or some comments on that. How do you want that communicated? Do you want email or do you want us to hang on to that till next week's study session?
And I think at this point, our hope was that this document remains static through the HPB public hearing and the Planning Commission public hearing. I think what we're hearing tonight is that there are a few points that need to be clarified. But I do think that you should work from the document that you have for this public hearing. If you feel that those clarifying pieces are covered, we're happy to take tonight's conversation and ensure that Brett, Brian, the KKC team, and our staff all get those clarifying pieces taken care of. But if there are any other changes that you would offer in the form as a condition or an amendment, the way that HPB's resolution read is that they applied conditions to that approval of the amended Title 10. So again, they put those 3 conditions in.
Yeah, I guess the one in particular, there were a number of things in there. For example, in a couple of occasions it talked about, typically like tasting rooms will typically have a state license. I don't think you can use words like typically. I think if they require a state license, we should state that they require a state license. There was a couple things about mandatory. I think there was on some of the landscaping, there was a comment along the lines of it's highly recommended, and it's like, well, that's great, but I think then it should be mandatory if we're recommending somebody put a weed barrier down, I think is what it had to do with. And on historic preservation, there was some comments about preservation will be contemplated before, any demolition occurs. So, the question there is what exactly does that mean? Do I have to think about it and then decide I want to demolish, or is there something specific with respect to a process, which I think there should be before anything historic's demolished? The one that I think is really important, and it hasn't come up tonight, but I think it's very legitimate. On page 160, there's a comment, there's some text about a group homes, and I think it's for folks with disabilities. I believe passionately we should add verbiage in there that requires people who operate group homes to have at least at a minimum an annual fire inspection and sign off by South Metro. There was a fire up in Arvada several years ago where a couple people with disabilities perished. And I think that was just horrible. And it could have been prevented. And I think as part of what we're doing, we should mandate that if you're going to run a group home for folks with developmental disabilities, you have to have fire department, fire code sign off, and the fire department has to bless what you're doing and how you're doing it. I'll stop there.
Yeah, that was good. And
I would just, Bruce, just one quick thing. The conversation with Historical Preservation Board is that we do know that the HP code, the Historic Preservation Code, has to be addressed in this Unified Land Use Code. So that is, the character statement becomes sort of a starting point. They're right now doing some of the background work to basically survey and identify buildings that have both historic significance and fit within the historic theme. So we're going to have a lot of those pieces in place through the ULUC.
City Attorney, I know you wanted to comment.
Just to Commissioner Stallman's comments. I was actually in Arvada at the City Attorney's office when that occurred. So well aware of what happened with that. And a lot of it had to do with the state licensing or lack thereof for that particular kind of group living situation. So I think they've made changes at a state level, but I will double check and see what we can do to ensure, for the longest time it was, discretionary in terms of if they wanted to let the fire protection district in and allow them to kind of check things out. So let me check on that for you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Council Member Fay.
I was really impressed with Pam's list. That included several things I wanted to say. So I'll just say that I would like to add a second to Pam's list. I would like to have all of those things addressed.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Commissioner Ullman.
I just want to commend the Next Generation Advisory Council for their reports that were attached tonight. And we didn't get into those a lot other than on general topics, but I was wondering, one, I think we need to pay attention to those and hopefully we are, but also how will we be looking at those and integrating or making sure that we cover some of those issues and comments in that? You don't have to answer that question. I just want to add that to a list, because other than those reports, we've not really had any interaction with the next gen group. So I really thought their reports were very impressive and thorough, well thought out. So
the only thing that I would add is that the one focused on sustainability, we look as a huge tool as we move towards the Unified Land Use Code. And then much of the comments relative to this phase 2, we've tried to incorporate those that fit within this phase 2 exercise, and then hope to continue to carry those forward in the Unified Land Use Code.
Great. Thank you very much. Sama Fox, I know you were keeping track of some comments that are being made by council. Are you prepared to go ahead and give us back those right now so we can make sure they were captured?
Yes, and I'm glad to be doing this because Council Member Grove was going fast, so I might need someone to catch me there.
There you go.
Okay, so on the greenscape and tree protection, I caught sustainability as a topic, for example, rain gardens and impervious surfaces. Kelly also mentioned this around bikes and electronic vehicles. On the building height conversation, I caught the economic viability of different building heights and the future impacts looking forward. On open spaces, I caught a question around whether this includes roofs, terrace, and gardens in the calculation. For parking, the scenario from EPS, so we can see that model, what it means with percentage versus square foot. On the land use table, I caught slot homes as our conversation item. For zoning district and character areas, there were a number of items captured under revisiting boundaries and digging into the character areas in the zoning map. That captures the Geneva Village conversation, the extension of DMU north of Littles Creek, as well as the removal of the 3-story limit northwest of Geneva Village and southwest of the City Hall. And then a couple of miscellaneous things I captured were the approval process for exceptions, partial view components, and zoning enforcement around STRs and tourist homes. What have I missed?
Yeah, Council, does that capture? We have Council Member Elrod.
There was safety, I guess, I called it screening or view that they would look at when looking at buffers and definition of buffers, is making sure we're not creating dark spaces or unsafe spaces.
Thank you, Karina. I'll capture that.
Great, thank you. We have Council Member Grove. I'm eventually going to get to the City Manager, but Council Member Grove.
Okay, a couple things that were mentioned too quickly for you, Sam. I'm sorry. Roof slopes, especially in DTA. Prohibit combining lots, which may be a point of clarification on wall lengths. Did you get the partial views?
Yes, but if you could give me a specific on what that's about.
Clarify what a partial view is, so it's not open to interpretation.
Thank you.
I think this is probably something that was mentioned, changing xeriscaping to low maintenance. That's something that KKC said they were going to do. Back to open space. Sorry, I'm skipping around a little bit here.
No problem.
KKC wanted to do some additional verbiage on the trees. And under height, there was a lot of different issues that came up. One of them was what Scott mentioned about adding an additional height, like a mixed use on top of an apartment on top of a mixed use. Could that go higher?
The clarification of a half story, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's correct. And whether or not it would extend it beyond the height limit.
Thank you.
And then Karina mentioned in DTA, is there like too much bulk? How do we deal with that? a big one that was mentioned by Dan Miller
I
was,
want to make sure, Pam, you got yours captured for council, for yours comments.
I got my comments, but there was
Okay.
a lot that was from council and planning commission that was missed. Yes.
Sure, and I'm just
Wait, let me chime in here a second, because planning commissions,
Absolutely.
they're going to have their meeting too. Mark, I think you're looking to get in.
Yes, thank you. I think it's, besides Sama taking notes, I've got 4 pages of notes of everything that people said. So some of this will be issues that Kenna Keast will follow up as just clarification. And then there's some other issues here that I think Pam is trying to raise as examples where we may carry as the council into this study session for further conversation. So my thought is that I'm going to work with the rest of staff and I'm going to consolidate this here this week, this list, and I will share that with council just to confirm what are we carrying into this study session and what are the typical topics that we talked about tonight that ties to it, if that sounds acceptable.
Great. That does.
As I understand it, that if this is a static document, it will evolve. Not everything, but some of this may evolve into amendments.
Correct. That's the intent of the study session is to talk through that.
That's
Thank
correct. Yeah, that's why I want to make sure, council, we have the council comments, because that's where the amendments will come from. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, Brett, thank you very much for getting us through this. With that, I think unless there's anything else, council, we can move on. And well, thank you, planning commission. The whole planning commission was here tonight, all 9 members.
Yes.
So thank you. That's tremendous.
Thank you, gang.
All right. Mark Renicki, did you have anything you want to add?
Just one thing. We're going to be obviously looking at draft 2 and voting on it this coming Monday. I asked staff if this draft 2 can be updated with a lot of these comments made tonight. The answer was no. So it's going to be a little cumbersome Monday. We could have 40 amendment votes here with various items because we're really voting on a draft 2 that's going to be, it's like a moving target. So it's going to be a little tough Monday. Am I correct in that we are not going to get a cleaned up, updated draft for this coming Monday?
Okay, and before that, the city manager answers that, if we could have the planning commissioners email their comments that were not captured, perhaps, that they want to make sure that are captured, then the city manager can work with his staff to try to address those before the Monday meeting or during, before the Monday meeting. City manager?
Yeah, so Mark, I may have Kathleen or Jennifer kind of reinforce this here or confirm, I guess. But yeah, I think just with this being Tuesday night and the packet for planning commission has got to come out on the end of the week.
Right.
It's just not practical to capture all of this. So I think staff's going to work really hard. And part that's why I took notes is so that combine all this here and get this to the planning commission so that you can be a little more effective on Monday. I certainly appreciate the challenge you've got.
Well, we're going to have to rely on some good faith here in our vote. I've had some comments in the previous first draft that still haven't been addressed in the second draft. God knows if they'll be addressed in the third draft. So anyway, there's a little bit of faith here in the planning commission in our vote.
Yeah, maybe it's approval with conditions. That might be the way to articulate that. Seriously.
Oh, sure. Well, conditions and amendments, et cetera. There could be a lot of them. Long night.
Yep.
Thanks.
Councilmember Elrod. You just have your hand up. There you go. All right, cool. Well, again, thank you everybody for participating tonight. I think it was a lot of information came out of there, good questions and comments. Thank you. And council, we got one more item to take, and I don't think it'll take us that long to complete it. So
sure.
Planning commissioners, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All righty. Unless someone needs to take a break, does anybody need to take a break?
Yes.
Was that Jennifer?
Yes. Can we, Mayor, just take 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's take 5. So right now it is 9:08. So let's get back, if we could, at Let's 9:09. Let's get back at 9:15.
Okay, thank you.
Great. This is the continuation of the City of Littleton City Council meeting for August 25, 2020. Right now it is 9:15, and we are going to hear from staff tonight about the, the ID number 20-198, the C-Click Fix update. And staff will provide us an update on customer service initiatives and non-emergency requests and the C-Click Fix tool. This presentation is going to be for information only. So council, we're not required to give any directions. So that they're just going to give us an update on where we are. So city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So council, I've talked with probably every single one of you about customer service. And I think that what we're going to be sharing with you as an update to our C-Click Fix software system is at least one part of the customer service here for our citizens in our community. So, you know, I've been experimenting with other cities and how they approach this issues. I've always had an interest in this. I just see this as one of the key issues that any city needs to provide our citizens as an effective tool to kind of manage their questions and concerns and complaints. And so I think the department directors, they've been challenged here over the last several months trying to come together. And they do have an approach that is an improvement. We have still some work to be done on this, but I have to hand it to them. They've come a long ways since we've kind of raised this issue internally here probably a couple of years ago. We are lots of upgrades that we're kind of pursuing here just internally, but I think I'm going to turn this over to Ashley, let you kick this thing off, and let's provide council with an update. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, council. We will try to make this quick. As public servants, ultimately everything that we do here is to support our citizens. And along that note, and with Mark's support, we have been working over the past 9 months trying to see how we can improve customer engagement, and really also with financial responsibility forefront, trying to look and see what we already have that we could continue to invest in and improve to try to deliver more results. Tonight, we'll be talking about some of the citizen inquiries that we do get. You'll be hearing from Jennifer Henninger and Keith Reister to understand a little bit about what is going on specifically in community development and public works. In addition, we'd like to give you an update on the cross-departmental project that we've been working on over the past 9 months, specifically around C-Click Fix. And then we have Genevieve Van Bueller, who is our IT business analyst, who is going to give you a quick demo on what the C-Click Fix application looks like, as well as a GIS dashboard that Jackie Phipps from our GIS team has built to show you some of the data that we really can use. We really are trying to look to use more technology every day and particularly gather more data, get better process in place, and really try to use that data to become data-driven. So want to give you some updates around that. And in conclusion, just give you some of our next steps. Real quick, I think I did just go over the agenda, so we'll jump right into Jennifer talking about some code enforcement statistics.
Exactly. So when we talk about code enforcement right now, we are getting those inquiries at a variety of different levels. 40% being on phone calls, C-Click Fix. We're really trying to up that number by the end of the year here via emails, in person, hard copy. And below here, you can see some of our numbers. We have had an impact on the numbers due to COVID, but not that far off. We thought we would be a much different delta here than we're seeing. So we are tracking these now with the technology that we have. And Keith, you want to talk about this one?
Absolutely.
You set my timer, Keith. Hang on a sec.
Perfect. It should click over just about 11:19. So one of the big challenges we have in public works is that we estimate that between 75 and 80% or more of our complaints come in through other forms besides C-Click Fix. That number pushes 90% during snowstorm and other weather events. So we are trying to develop a methodology where we can capture that data into a platform, and we're limited in the administrative capability to do that right now, just with pure workforce. So we're going to be working through that over the next several months as we try and adapt some technologies to improve that. But, beyond, outside of police, we're the second most complained about department, or we take the most complaints is probably the way to put it, probably better. And, police has dispatchers on 24 hours a day, and that's what they're doing. And that's not our situation. So we're going to be trying to do that as much as possible. We've been discussing automated call attendance, and we have some discussion about that, although the calls all end up in the same place, regardless of what they click. So we're just trying to figure our way through that. But when you see the public works numbers, you're really only looking at a very small snapshot of the total amount of feedback and inquiries we get from the community on any given day. And we also, just as a last note, that last bullet point is, when we made the decision on our asset management software, Cartograph, as part of that selection process and looking at firms, we made sure that the firms we looked at also had a very distinct connection with SeeClickFix, and Cartograph had the strongest one there. So that'll allow us, one of our key goals in public works is geographic location of concerns and complaints. So that's an area that we're also working on as well.
So we wanted to give you a little bit of background on the evolution and history of SeeClickFix, in hopes of trying to get your support of really trying to be ambassadors for helping our citizens understand that we have SeeClickFix. I think Karina brought up last week, about that investment in trying to use technology that can really reach our citizens, that our citizens can use. And while we didn't bring up SeeClickFix last week because we were talking about CARES Act, which was net new investment, and SeeClickFix is something we've already invested in, this is really what we're talking about when we talk about technology that our citizens have available to them, that we really would like to try to get better marketing and adoption around. SeeClickFix was implemented back in 2014. From the history that I've heard talking with the teams, there was little collaboration, standardization across process or configuration, and even training amongst the staff. So this past fall in 2019, we sought to get a cross-departmental team together to relook at that and see how we could look to make things better. That included doing an upgrade of the SeeClickFix application itself. You may recall that it previously was called Click and Fix Littleton. That application is no longer being upgraded or supported, so we have moved to the delivered SeeClickFix version. We also have implemented a new dashboard that we'll be showing you a demo, as well as process improvements. I'm going to skip over the future because we'll be talking about next steps later on. But just want to tell you a little bit about SeeClickFix. SeeClickFix is a community-driven application that really puts the technology in our citizens' hands via either a website or a simple app on their phone that they can use to literally take a picture. We'll see a problem, take a picture, and report it for staff to look at and fix. It's great technology in the sense that we automatically get the data directly from the citizen and exactly what they have seen. It saves us data entry in terms of we don't have to type in the data that we get, and it also helps us with duplicates. When we have complaints coming in through email and through walk-ups through phone, it is very hard for us to identify any duplicates because we could be talking to different people, and if the data is not in a system, we can't recognize that is going on, and we could have multiple people working the same issue. So trying to get an adoption of SeeClickFix is critical to where we're trying to go in using data and having our staff be able to be more efficient and more effectively work the requests that we get from citizens. What's not in SeeClickFix today? Currently, police department calls for service and citations are not. We do have a parking category where citizens can put non-emergency requests into SeeClickFix around parking, but other police department requests are handled in our CAD and RMS systems. Additionally, some of our code enforcement cases are not in SeeClickFix yet. Keith had mentioned an integration to Cartograph. We are working with Central Square, who is the company who provides our Trackit code enforcement and permitting system. We're working on trying to get an integration with SeeClickFix with Trackit, but that does not exist yet. So we do have some code enforcement cases that are in track and are not in SeeClickFix. And additionally, all those phone calls, emails, mail, walk-up requests that we get that I was just mentioning. Right now, if staff has time, some of those are manually entered, but again, they take time. And when you have an incident, like Keith mentioned, where you're getting 300 calls, there's no way that staff has the availability to be in there and keying all of these, which is why, again, our plea to ask for citizen help to try to help us enter that data so that we don't have to take the time to do it. And those are basically the public work inquiries that aren't in SeeClickFix necessarily today as well. So we got together a cross-departmental team last fall that included community development, IT, PD, and public works to try to start meeting and brainstorm approaches that we could take. We focused on 3 key areas. That was around the data cleanup, where we spent months actually going through a backlog of tickets that actually were in there, some of them from 2014 that had never been cleaned up. So the team did a phenomenal job of going through and working to resolve those or close them out if they were no longer an issue. We also worked on application improvements. That included such things as reviewing all of the different questions that come with each category. You'll get to see in the demo what that looks like, but we tried to standardize and make the questions more consistent across each of the different categories, as well as we tried to add in some best practices. Keith mentioned, again, trying to identify the location of a particular request or complaint. A lot of times through SeeClickFix, if the user tries to do the request from home, we may not get the right address. So we did a best practice improvement of adding a qualification question at the end to get the users to confirm the actual address of where the request or complaint is coming from. That helps us save a lot of time by being able to pinpoint exactly the first time around and minimize the back and forth that could be time consuming. Additionally, we worked on some process improvements. One such thing there was around service level agreements, or SLAs, you may have heard. And we really looked to try to do a standard process where the team is now striving to actually acknowledge and basically respond back to a citizen that we have seen their request and are looking at it within 2 business days for each of our categories, and a resolution service level agreement of 7 days. This is an average. This does not mean that all requests will be acknowledged in 2 days or all requests will be resolved. A lot of them may be done much quicker. A lot of them may take longer than 7 days, but on average, we're looking to try to average to acknowledge within 2 days and resolve within 7 days. We also did put in a lot of additional email responses that we can help standardize how we're responding, and our citizens can get, I think, more of a better feel of how we'll be communicating back and forth. So really trying to use email as well that helps them get automatic updates when we do have an update in the system versus them having to call and check on status. If we're able to do this through the system, they can get automatic updates when we have an update to share. So I'm going to turn it over to Genevieve Van Bueller to do a quick demo of, again, she's going to show you the website as well as the app, and then show you the dashboard that you guys all have access to. Actually, all of our citizens do, to look at this data at your convenience.
Thank you, Ashley. So as Ashley mentioned, my name is Genevieve Van Bueller. I am the IT business analyst, and I will be showing you a couple of different slides showing the demo of what a citizen's experience will be on the littletongov.org, as well as a mobile device application. So let me get that started up for you. So there has been quite a bit of concern about safety with some of the categories within SeeClickFix. And so that cross-departmental group that Ashley mentioned got together and went through every single category that is in SeeClickFix to find out what are categories that could cause an insight, hostile confrontation between citizens or neighbors. We definitely want to avoid that at all costs. And so we went through that cross-departmental group, went through and identified these categories as whether they're private, so they will not show on the GIS dashboard or in the SeeClickFix listing. Those are your private categories. Anything in the public section will continue to show. We basically went through each of those categories to identify where have we seen issues or what could possibly incite that hostile confrontation between citizens. So I'm going to walk you real quick through maybe. My apologies. So this is the City of Littleton.gov.org website, and any citizen, if they see something, they can come onto this website and scroll to the bottom. You have a distinct icon there with a heart with a wrench in it. Here it lets them know that as Ashley mentioned, the Click and Fix Littleton is no longer supported, and that they can get a mobile device application. It then reinforces if it's an emergency to call 911, as well as there's that See Click Fix dashboard with the GIS that Ashley mentioned. We will be talking about at the very end of this demonstration. So citizens can go directly from here and select a category. They can either start typing a category or scroll down. Here we're going to do a miscellaneous code enforcement violation. This is marked based on that previous slide as a private. The citizen can either use their mouse. If it is located outside of Littleton, it will tell them it's out of our service area, or they can actually go in and type the direct address and pinpoint that information. They're just going to click the confirm location here. And there's a little bit of a delay, sorry about that. The citizen can then add an image if they took something when they were observing the incident, or they can choose no photo. Here they're going to put in the details. Now notice that it also says optional displayed publicly. So this would be if this was a public category, and as I mentioned on the previous slide, miscellaneous code enforcement violation is a private. So that it's actually not going to be displayed publicly. But it will be sent over to the City of Littleton employees. Here as well, it's asking for describing the violation. If it was a public category, that piece would also be showing on the dashboards, both the GIS and the See Click Fix. Same with each different category, as Ashley mentioned, will have different questions. Here, always, we're asking for a phone number. It will never, ever be displayed publicly. Doesn't matter if it's a public category or not, it will never be displayed. So citizens can have that comfort of their private information will not be shared. Here is again where Ashley mentioned that they can confirm that address or the closest location intersection that will also be displayed if it's a public category. Once they confirm the details, they have the option. And here it notes it is private, so it will not show on those. They can submit it as themselves or hide their identity and submit it anonymously or submit it as a guest. If they submit it as a guest, they will not get those automatic email notifications that Ashley was just referring to. Once they hit submit, it will go in, give them a number that they can reference. And so they can then go in and start looking at those. The next one is the mobile application. So they can go into their app stores, whether it's an iPad, Apple device, or an Android device, find the See Click Fix application. Once they click into it, it will show them the number of fixes that we have. They can click that report button. They can post something to Facebook or Twitter, or they can hit that plus button down at the bottom. Again, similar to the website, they can choose whether if they're at the actual incident, they can use their camera on their mobile device to take a picture, or choose something from their library, or select no photo. Very similar again to the website, they can either enter in the address if they know it. If they do not know it, again, similar to the website, they can move their finger over the application and find the intersection in which they wanted to note that the incident occurred. Once they do that, up in the top right, they'll click next. Again, they can search for a category or scroll through. Here we're going to choose a graffiti category, which is a public. Graffiti, we figure even if it's on private property, neighbors may be appreciative that there may be a wall of their property that they do not normally see. And if a neighbor mentions it, there actually may be a little bit appreciative. So we do not see that this one inciting hostile confrontation. So here again, if they had the photo, that photo would show here. The description is being displayed publicly as this is a public category. Again, here, please provide a detailed description. This is not displayed publicly, and it's nice that it actually tells you what is and what is not being displayed, similar to what that website was doing. And here I just was having some fun of guessing what one might be. And making sure that our staff didn't actually do anything with it because that was a test. Again, here, similar to the website, the phone numbers are always asked, but never displayed publicly. Again, that privacy for the citizens is the utmost importance for us. Again, as Ashley mentioned and is on the website, we're confirming that address or the closest intersection. This is displayed publicly. And I had a little bit of autocorrect going on there, so I apologize. And here again, you can also hide your identity from public view just by clicking on that toggle. Once they're done, up in the top right corner, they can hit submit. It will then let them know, hey, I can share this with my neighbors. Or not. It also provides that same request ID. It will also send them an email letting them know it's been assigned. That's one of those automatic automations that Ashley was referring to. They can then from the app also look at previous identified requests, and they can go either from a map view or a list view. So as Ashley mentioned, the GIS dashboard that we have created, this is just a quick snapshot. We're going to actually launch into it. So this will show you how many tickets or requests are unacknowledged and how many are open. Some little graphics. If you click on the graphics over here, it can change some of the other items that are showing. One thing that I want to definitely show you guys is that over here on the top right of the map, you can zoom into the map, but you can also look by your council district. You can then also add hotspot, which means where are there the most categories being submitted? And you can then definitely zoom into your individual council districts and find those out. These colors can be a little bit confusing, and so we have a legend right here with this little line here. You can see what the active reports are based on their categories. Again, only the public categories will show here. Those private categories will not. For the hotspots, this is going to show you your color information to let you know what's high and low in your city council district. In addition to being able to see the map, you can actually go in and click somewhere on the map and it can show you what types of public categories are out there. So for this particular area, you're looking at a street light. There are 4 tickets out there for this area, and you can scroll through just using these arrows here. If you wanted to go in and actually look at the details, you can just click your ticket details. And it's going to show you what was submitted, any picture that was provided, any information, and any conversations within the comments. So these comments, as the City of Littleton employees are working on it, these will be part of that automatic notification emails that Ashley was mentioning. If a citizen wants to follow, they can click follow, and then they will continue to also get the email notifications anytime work is logged onto that ticket. And Ashley, I am done if you want me to hand that back over to you.
Thanks so much, Genevieve. So just in conclusion, I think we wanted to show you a quick slide of just some overall statistics that we thought were interesting. Jen's going to get this pulled up in just a sec.
Hang on.
Well, Ashley, I have a question while you're doing that.
Sure.
So who closes out the order or work order?
So we have each of the different categories are assigned to different employees within the city. For example, I think the private graffitis go to Rebecca Thompson and Jennifer's group. The public ones go to Ann Buell over in Public Works. And so we have standard operating procedures that have been created by each of those departments to then execute on the work. In some cases, like with Cartograph, where we actually have that integration, Jerry, a work order will automatically be created in Cartograph for Jake Weaver's team to actually go and work that request that's been done. And similarly, that's what we're trying to work on with Trackit with the code enforcement group as well, so that the work order or code case will actually automatically be created and Trackit for Rebecca's team to work.
So the work order is not being closed by the individual doing the work.
So typically it can be reassigned actually to different employees. We just have one dedicated person as kind of the primary contact, but we have been able to set up alternate contacts to make sure that if that person is out, for example, the alternate can get it. But typically it is up to that, I guess, primary person to then delegate and assign the actual requests out to other staff employees.
Gotcha. Karina.
Kind of a follow-up, I think, for clarification of what you just asked. So when something gets closed, it doesn't necessarily mean it was resolved. It's just been taken to the department that would address it. So obviously a pothole won't get resolved in 7 days, right? So is that my understanding? It's closed doesn't mean it's fixed. It just got navigated to the right department to address.
Yeah, and in some cases, like that pothole, we would not actually close that, Karina. We would leave it open, and that's where, again, our SLA over time, we're looking for an average of trying to get it 7 days. The potholes will definitely skew to the extreme, whereas something else like a parking complaint may be able to be resolved immediately. We do feel like there'll be a balance between some taking shorter and some taking longer, and on average will result in a 7-day resolution SLA.
And on the code enforcement cases, we do have some of those cases that will become a court case. So we'll close it on SeeClickFix with the note that this has become a code enforcement case with a number that they can call for information on that case.
And some of these, to your point too, may never actually be resolved. Sometimes I think we do get some complaints that really are just complaints and there really is nothing, quote unquote, to resolve. So do also want to point out that sometimes there are things where I guess there really is no resolution. But for the most part, I think we are trying to follow that 80-20 rule and try to really focus the majority of our resources on trying to fix the 80% that we really can in a timely, effective manner.
Yeah, another question.
Oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I was just making sure nobody else had their hand up.
Okay.
Do you have like when do you get, is there a seasonality to this? Do you tend to get more complaints at one time versus another?
So that is exactly where we're trying to get to and why it is so critical for us to get as many data entry points into SeeClickFix as possible. Right now with Keith's example, for example, that 80% of his requests and complaints are outside the system. We're not getting that visibility. And that's exactly where we're trying to get to, coupled with, you'll see on the next slide here, that with other data points that we're getting, for example, with going to our new phone system, we're now on a cloud-based phone system as of the end of July, so can get coupled with SeeClickFix also some more data on our calls, when our calls are coming, can we see seasonality, can we see times of day? Because we've already been talking about how could we look to try to reallocate our resources to better plan for and respond to some of these peak demands. Blizzards obviously is a huge one where Keith gets bombarded, and could we look to train up some folks from other different staff departments to help supplement? And that's where the new phone system, coupled with better data coming from SeeClickFix, I think really can make that a reality for us to execute on.
I think, Keith, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. For us, a lot of it is unpredictable weather events. We also know that people call a whole bunch in the spring related to street sweeping, and then again in the fall. Paving complaints. Several of you have sent those to me just in the last week via email yourselves. It is definitely seasonal for us, and it's also, weather dependent. It also depends on what other people are doing or what people read in the news too. That also drives a number of our complaints, and you've all seen that. You get those complaints as well. We just get them in significant volumes on those types of events too. So we'll try and, we know when they're coming. We just got to balance for that.
Any other questions?
Karina.
Okay, so
Karina has one.
Okay.
But Keith, I don't see your complaints or issues on here. So is that what the eventual intent is, that some of your categories end up on here as well, so that we can help you gather that input? I don't necessarily see, great issues on here, other than the pothole.
So those were just the top 5 so far this year, Karina. We do have a whole list that's available on the dashboard.
Looking at it, so I see pothole and maybe sidewalk snow removal, traffic signal, maybe.
Right, and we've got some sewer and storm related categories as well, that are the ones that are currently feeding into our cartograph system, as well as some of the graffiti is also for public works, for the public property.
All right. Proceed.
But so just in conclusion, we just wanted to give you an idea of where we're continuing to go with this. So we have, now that we basically have gone live with the cleaned up data, the new application, the revised configuration and standard operating procedures that we are consistently trying to follow across all of our departments, again, to try to give a user the similar experience no matter which department at the city they work with. We're continuing to meet monthly, and during those monthly meetings, we are looking at the data, trying to get those trends that Karina had pointed out so that we can better plan for the future and allocate our resources the most effectively. We're also continuing to review our processes and procedures. We realize things are going to be changing and evolving, and the great thing about this system that it is flexible. We can continue to add new categories, Karina. If there are additional things we'd like to track, we can reassign things on the fly. We'll also be continuing on conducting trainings. One of the things we found out, our existing SLAs, for example, we were only hitting 88% on our acknowledgements. While the resolutions, I think, may take longer given some of those variables, we should really be able to respond within 2 business days no matter what. So we're trying to get those numbers up, and during one of our last meetings, we realized we had some staff turnover without proper training. So that allowed us to basically realize that we really have to focus on getting onboarding trainings, and making sure that our new folks, just like our existing folks, know what they need to do. As I mentioned, we went live with our phone system at the end of July, so we're also looking to try to take those call volumes to better be able to plan, prepare, and analyze how to best respond to our citizens and events that happen. We're continuing to look at those integration opportunities to minimize duplication of work in different systems and better take advantage of that streamlined efficiency. Continuing also to figure out ways to better report and to improve our dashboard based on feedback. And then also longer term, continuing to see is SeeClickFix the be all end all solution for us. again, with taking fiscal responsibility in the forefront, we're trying to use what we have and do the best we can and make sure that we're using our current investments as wisely as possible. But it may not be the best long-term solution, so we'll continue to evaluate that. And then I think, again, the biggest ask is really to try to figure out how we can better market SeeClickFix. And we had a recent meeting with Kelly Nardi and had some great marketing ideas of trying to do a fall campaign this year, creating videos. In hindsight, we wish we would have thought to have tried to market SeeClickFix when we were doing the paving for pizza, for example. That would have been a great opportunity to tie it in, but to look more creatively and strategically of how we can get the word out to our citizens. And that, I think, is our final ask for you as well, to ask for your help to be ambassadors of getting our citizens to use this and use it yourselves. Genevieve is welcome to do any kind of trainings to show you guys a bit more, and looking for other ideas for how we could better, again, get this advertised and get our citizens to use it. So, and any questions in conclusion?
I don't see any.
All right. I guess we went longer than 30 minutes, but
we tried.
Like 6 minutes over.
We tried.
Well, good job. Did you have anything else? And thank you, Genevieve, for the tour.
You're absolutely welcome. My pleasure.
All right, thank you. All right.
So, Jerry, if I can add one thing. So just to give you an example of the reason that we would love to encourage all of you to use SeeClickFix is that on any given day, multiple department heads receive similar emails from City Council asking about, a question, whether they've seen a pothole or if it's in regard to a homeless camp or something like that. And so you're taking up, multiple staff time. So if we can get it through SeeClickFix, we can see that that question has already been submitted, and it reduces our staff time and allows us to do many of the other things that we have as your council priorities right now. So just another pitch to please walk the talk and use this application as much as possible.
And just on that note about duplicates as well, SeeClickFix is continuing to invest in the technology and using AI or artificial intelligence to actually help us detect those duplicates as well. So the technology can help us eliminate those as well. So another reason to try to use it if we can.
All right, well, cool. You are now 7 minutes over.
Good night.
No, that was very good. Very good. I'm glad to see the program's progressing. It looks like a great asset management tool. All right. Anything else on that, Mark?
No, Mayor, that's it.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And let's move on to our next item. That'll be City Manager report.
No report, Mayor.
City Attorney.
Yeah, Mark took all my time again. No report.
Great. Well, that's it. See you guys all next Tuesday.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much.
It is now 9:53 and we are adjourned.